I think there is a lot of denial about how deeply we've failed, to tell you the truth.
Failed to keep young people in the church.
Yeah, and more, not just young people, I mean just everybody.
The stark reality of low mass attendance hits the Catholic Church in the US and in Europe. A new revitalization effort in Austria provides a hopeful example of how young people can be drawn into a meaningful relationship with God.
Is that we really are saying to individuals, here are some resources to help you learn to invite.
A mission in one U.S. archdiocese is teaching the laity to be proactive in bringing Catholics back to Christ. 90-year-old Cardinal Joseph Zen goes on trial in Hong Kong. Analysis of the communist regime's tightening grip on the faithful.
She took time with people. She wouldn't distinguish people. You could be rich, you could be poor, but she treated everyone the same. This was something special that God had put into Mother, that compassion for others.
A new movie about Mother Teresa hits the theaters as her friends reflect on her continued impact on the church. EWTN News In Depth starts now.
Jesus loves you that much, and he's showing that to us on the altar every single time Mass is celebrated. And to help people uncover a new wonder for that, so they're no longer holding on to their own selves, but saying, you know, I need a Savior, I need God.
A call for Catholics in one of the nation's largest archdioceses to rediscover their faith and bring lost sheep back home. The mission comes during a time when we're seeing a dramatic change in the religious landscape of the United States. Our country, founded on faith and trust in God, is seeing a rise in atheism and secularism. The latest poll from the Pew Research Center indicates a sharp decline in Americans who call themselves Christian. Christians accounted for about 90% of the population in 1972, but as of 2020, Christians make up only about 64% of the U.S. population. And it's projected that by 2070, it could drop to 46% or even lower. The number of congregants attending church has been on a steady decline. The COVID lockdowns only made things worse. A recent EWTN News Real Clear opinion research poll indicates that just 33% of U.S. Catholics attend Mass every week. A new campaign launched by the Archdiocese of Los Angeles takes creative steps in helping Catholics share their faith with family and friends. As Catholics, we're called to share the gospel. But that's not always easy in our growing secular society. We also face the challenge of not knowing our own faith well enough to answer all the questions that may come our way. But the Back to Mass campaign provides resources for Catholics to make sure that they're better prepared to answer questions from those who are curious about Catholicism. They also provide tangible invitations, with room for a personalized note to a loved one, as well as bracelets to give to a friend that include QR codes with information on local Masses they can attend. Small physical gifts that could provide a spiritual pathway to coming to the one true faith. I had the opportunity to speak with the woman who helped launch the unique Back to Mass campaign in LA. Sarah Yaklik, the Chief Digital Officer for the Archdiocese of Los Angeles, shared her love and enthusiasm for this mission. Take a look. Sarah, it's so great to have you here to talk about this new initiative that you just launched. And it has a specific purpose. A lot of us are thinking about the post-COVID world still, which is annoying for some, but the reality is it did affect us. It changed our lives. What called you? Rather, how did God call you into this response, into this moment?
You know, when you look at what has been happening for the last several decades, we have seen the number of people just leaving our church, and actually at a very rapid pace. And then, as you said, COVID came, and that just took that trend and accelerated it. And I just sat with my digital team and said, you know, we're called right now to evangelize the digital highways, not to evangelize the digital space, but to bring people to an encounter with Jesus. And the most beautiful way to do that is through the celebration of Mass. And I know people in my own life who are away from the church, and just looking at empty church pews and saying, we need to do something now, and we need to take as much creativity and gift that to the Lord so he could work with us and try and reverse that trend.
Now, reaching out to the laity, so the Catholic faithful, isn't something new. We've had a couple of different campaigns. The Catholics Come Home campaign, bringing people back who were baptized but hadn't finished their formation, or The Light is On for You, which is a call to confession. How is this campaign different, both in its name, in its essence, and in the call?
So when we really studied, we were looking at the studies and the number of people away from Mass and looking at the digital platform and the digital spheres. And I started asking myself, how could we be most effective and most intentional? And what is Jesus inviting us to in this campaign? And I realized it's not time for us, especially in the Church of Los Angeles, to go again for people who are away, right? We're not going to create an ad campaign for those who are away. What we're going to do is empower our faith community to help us invite others back, right? People in this day and age trust individuals more than they trust institutions. So what better way to help inspire our faithful to say, it's up to you. Like, you have a call and a responsibility to help us fill those church pews. And so we're really, instead of targeting our main audience, people who are away, we're saying, let's teach you how to invite.
And from a Catholic perspective, 1 in 5 Americans is Catholic or identifies as Catholic. When you're looking at the Catholic laity, do you think that they were waiting for the bishops to have a call to come back to Mass?
I think I call it Our Lady of Guadalupe moment, actually, because I think the part of her story that I love the most is that she didn't start by going to the bishop. She went to St. Juan Diego, and she empowered St. Juan Diego to be that messenger, right? And it was going to the bishop and his persistence, like that lay persistent voice, like knocking not just one time on, what is now like the chancery doors, right? But knocking again. And that's when the miracle of Our Lady of Guadalupe happened, when he was before that bishop and put that tilma down, and she appears, right? Because a lay young man had the courage to live out his faith, right? And so that's what we are called to do. And I think our church sometimes forgets to empower people, right? As lay Catholics, we are baptized. And by that baptism, we have a responsibility and a beautiful gift to spread our faith.
Let's get into the nitty-gritty of your campaign, because it's so fantastic how you designed this. You're calling people back into church, but you're also, it's not that you're saying no to the live stream. You know that live stream can be something that is there if there's a big enough ministry that brings the Eucharist to people who are watching and who are participating in the Mass in that way. Tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, my Papa George, every Sunday, he dresses up for Mass. He puts his Sunday church clothes on, and he sits in his chair in the living room, and he watches, but he actively participates. Like, he's the prime example as somebody who's really worshiping as best as he can, being homebound. But then we could gift him by bringing communion home to him, right? That's when live stream works. However, we've seen the trend where people, put it on pause and go heat up their coffee, or decide, I don't want to listen to the homily, or I've listened to the homily, that's enough for today, right? That is not, we are an incarnational church, and live streams are never going to give us that deep miracle that happens on that altar. And so it's time for us to say, live streams were helpful, but they will never, ever, replace that miracle of celebrating Mass in person. I've read a number of reports or studies where people say, I'm afraid to invite because I don't know all the church teaching, or I'm afraid to invite because I don't know what to say. And when I look back, when we were, breaking open all the elements of the campaign, we went to the source. We went to Jesus himself. And what did he say in scriptures? Come and see, right? Come and see. And so that's what we could do. Your invitation doesn't have to be perfect. You just have to be authentically you. Like, when you're authentically you, you are most reflective of God's love in the world. And you just make that invitation to people. And yes, if they've been away from the church, there's the sacrament of confession, or there are answers, there are priests, there are resources to help you, find that information you're looking for.
Sarah, you did other really beautiful things during COVID. You had a live rosary with the Archbishop. You had all kinds of outreach. No one would say that everything that was done was perfect. It was beautiful, but it was the intention of the invitation and of showing people that the lights were still on inside the church, and they were still on fire around their community. What have you seen works the best in that outreach? It is an intentional invitation, but is there something else? Is it just a retweet, or just a I do this too?
Yeah, and that's it. We each have a call. Everybody who's on Facebook, everyone who's on Instagram, I think sometimes we're afraid to live out our faith in those platforms, and we're called to sanctify them. Like, that's our role as Catholics, right? There are Twitter wars. It's ugly online, right? And so we have to say, no, we're Catholics, so I'm going to live my faith in a radical way online, and that means not being afraid to speak the truth, not being afraid to say, hey, I'm going to check in at my parish here on Sunday. You know, we check into a restaurant, so we take the great picture of our food and we're so happy to post that. But what about posting the beautiful art in your church? Or maybe a line from the homily that really touched you, right? If every single person did that, we'd sanctify it and then make faith more real for people, and then maybe even help people say, you know, I'm hungry for that, or that makes sense to me. And maybe then is that moment that someone else would reconsider.
Absolutely. There are consequences, though, to speaking out and to being a faithful Catholic, and we've seen those rampant around the country with vandalism and arson. And you chose this great moment, rather you were probably given this great moment to launch your campaign as you're celebrating the close of the Jubilee, the 250th anniversary of the San Gabriel mission, and also the first Mass celebrated after arson there.
Yeah.
Tell us about that moment.
Yeah, and that moment, that is precisely why we picked that day to launch our campaign, right? We're celebrating 250 years of faith in Los Angeles because the brave missionaries went, opened that Mission San Gabriel. But also that first Mass after the arson, I mean, I remember standing inside the mission several times throughout the past 2 years since the arson, and, you know, having the ceiling down and just covered in scaffolding and thinking this sacred space was destroyed by someone's intention, right? They intently set our sacred space on fire and tried to destroy it. But walking in that mission church on Saturday and seeing that we're bringing the faith back so that the faith could go out those doors again, I had tears in my eyes, right? I mean, what a gift. The very first place that Mass was ever celebrated in what is now the Archdiocese of Los Angeles could we be now in 2022, you know, starting a campaign to invite people to celebrate the miracle that has happened in there.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thanks. It's a gift to be with you.
There have been efforts across the nation by parishes to draw more people into church. Some are more successful than others. Dan Salucci, the CEO of the Catholic Leadership Institute, has been on the front lines of helping parishes bring more people to Mass. He joins us now from Philadelphia. Dan, it's great to have you here with us. During the pandemic, you noticed a pattern of avoidance rather than engagement by church leadership. What did that look like?
Yeah, it was a lot of assumed constraints, as we would say, and it's great to be with you, Montse. The reality was that the folks in parish offices, a lot of our pastors, like all of us, were really struggling with what to do and what we knew and what we didn't know. But there were some things that we were recommending and seeing, like placing phone calls to parishioners and just reaching out in whatever different way to just maintain that relationship. And some just said, well, there's too much going on. People don't want to hear from us. They're getting so many phone calls as it is. But really, I think at the heart of it was maybe a fear or a lack of confidence to actually reach out and have those conversations that we're not used to having sometimes as Catholics.
And you know that those are important. You're an expert in church-going Catholics. This is what you study. It's your ministry. And you mentioned that we practice a faith of habit in this OSV talk that you gave a couple of 18 months ago, I think. And then COVID broke this habit. We know that the numbers are bad. Were they bad before the pandemic?
Yeah, we were on a precipitous decline prior to the pandemic, and the pandemic really only catalyzed and kind of opened that up for us to see more clearly. In our research prior to the pandemic, and actually still to this day, among those who were going weekly to Mass, about 25 to 35% were saying that they were really practicing a faith of habit. They didn't really know why they were going. And that's really the population that we've seen absent since the pandemic because that habit has been broken. So we're seeing an average of between 18 to 30% in some dioceses of people who were going in 2019, not going now, still here in 2022. So we attribute that to that kind of Mass going out of habit that was defined for about a quarter of our folks.
So the pandemic really unearthed something that was already there. That pre-pandemic, this problem of generational disengagement, millennials and Gen Z individuals refusing to come to Mass, have those trends changed in any way?
Unfortunately, they have gone south a little bit quicker. So we see the biggest departure of people not going is millennials and Gen Zs. And so now some of that might be related to, again, their families or the larger families not going, but the reality is a lot of our other regular parts of life or habitual parts of life have resumed. Travel soccer is well and good in the United States of America. And so we don't see any decline there. So it's really not related to COVID precautions or COVID fear as much as it's related to the relevance of the faith in their lives. And that's where we're seeing the biggest decline among millennials and Gen Z.
Well, let's talk about what we can do to move the decline over. What does the Catholic community then need to do to identify what can and should be done to reinvigorate the Christian life in their community?
Sure. I think one of the things we saw as a real clear picture because of COVID were parishes that were really event driven on one end. So everything's an event, the Mass, the fish fry, the fall festival, all these things that are kind of cultural or traditional or habitual. Those things obviously weren't allowed for a period of time. And so those parishes that were kind of on that event driven mentality were really paralyzed and kind of remained so for a long time. Versus parishes that were really formed and steeped in relationship with our Lord, first and foremost, but relationship with each other in the Lord. And so those parishes that were really already kind of in that relationship mindset, meaning we're a community together, we have to be involved in each other's lives, we have to support each other in times of heartache and in times of blessing. Those parishes that really double down on a relationship focus not only have been holding their own, but actually have been thriving despite the larger trend lines going in the opposite direction. So I think it really speaks to a need to be, as Pope Francis says, in the homes of our brothers and sisters, that's where the church really lives. We should not be just a Sunday reality. We really need to be the whole week long, really knowing each other's lives, walking with each other, and the parish doing that in a lot of different ways. One quick story, my CFO at the time had lost her mother to COVID. When I was checking in with her about it, she said, I said, how has the parish been? And she said, well, they were great for the funeral. She said, but you know what made the difference? She said, 2 months later, they called me to ask me how I was. And I think those little moments are where we see the big differences. So we can't discount that life happens in small moments, but those small moments really leave a big part in our heart that keeps us connected and keeps us connected to the Lord.
And that's what we're called to engage with each other. So then where is that silver lining? What good comes from these dismal numbers? And what fruit are you seeing in efforts like the Back to Mass campaign in LA? Yeah, well,
you had Sarah on. She's a great light in our church. And I think that is certainly a bright light. But I think what as I mentioned earlier, habits were broken. Some good habits of going to Mass, for example, were broken, but other bad habits were broken too. I think the idea, for example, we can't use technology for anything, that was an assumed constraint. And now I see parishes doing small group faith sharing using Zoom or using some type of virtual platform, not because they're afraid of the pandemic, but because for a millennial father or a millennial mother, it's a lot easier to connect with a small group and break open the gospel using Zoom from the comfort of their house. That's a great use of technology that many parishes wouldn't have even dreamed about prior to COVID. I think it also showed, the technology just showed that we as a church are still relatively nimble. I think sometimes we think we can't turn the Titanic, so to speak. But the reality is in a short period of time, we figured out a lot of different things. And I think that should be really encouraging to us that we can continue to figure out good strategies for inviting people home.
Well, thank you so much, Dan, both for your mission and for this encouragement.
Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
EWTN has recently conducted another poll on Catholicism in America and current concerns of the faithful just in time for the midterm elections. That poll will be released next week, and we will explore the data with expert analysis. We continue our conversation about drawing people back into the church with a look at how a new parish is evangelizing youth in Austria. There's much more ahead on EWTN News In Depth.
Mother Teresa teaches us a lot of things, how to treat the poor, how to live our faith. But for me, I think she's a reminder that at the end of the day, we have to be people of courage and we have to stand up for the truth.
The life of St. Teresa of Calcutta continues to inspire Catholics and non-Catholics around the world. How one movie is honoring her legacy. And a 90-year-old Catholic cardinal stands trial in Hong Kong as China continues to tighten its grip on the Catholic Church. A religious liberty expert weighs in. All that still to come.
The
big dream that we have really is to start a movement of parish revitalization.
Hope for the future of the church, to ignite a revival and bring more souls to the Eucharist. Welcome back to EWTN News In Depth. Our discussion continues on the dwindling number of Catholics attending Sunday Mass. Many factors may be contributing to this growing issue, from a rise in materialism, atheism, and secularism, to the lasting impacts of COVID, reports of sexual abuse, financial scandals, or a lack of proper faith formation. In Austria, the church faces the same dilemma, but as EWTN correspondent Colin Flynn reports, efforts are underway to draw young people home to the faith, and they're proving successful.
Here in the Austrian capital of Vienna, the number of young people under the age of 35 practicing their faith is only 1%. It seems as if the Catholic faith is on the verge of slipping away completely from the next generation.
There's a bishop here that told me we're in free fall and we have no idea what to do. And we believe through our faith that Christ wants to reach people today just as well as he did, in any other time. So we, out of that faith, that's why we're searching.
Statistics published at the end of this year showed that the number of Catholics in the entire country of Austria fell in 2021 by around 1.6%, from 4.9 million in 2020 to 4.8 million in 2021. The sharpest drop-off has been among young people, which is starting to set off alarm bells across the Catholic Church in Austria.
The answers that we get again and again is the church is not providing answers, and it's boring. I don't understand the homilies, and I'm the only young person under 50 using the church, so why should I go? It doesn't give me anything for my life. It's not that they're not asking questions, but they're definitely not going to the church looking for answers.
Father George Elspeth is from Canada, but has been working in Vienna for 18 years. And seeing the sharp decline in young people practicing their faith, in 2015 he decided to start a new parish in the diocese, called the John Paul II Centre, which is exclusively aimed at bringing in young people.
Because I'm a priest, I love people, and I think that God is the deepest answer to the deepest longings of the human person.
Eva is a 28-year-old student and a member of this new parish. She plays music here at the church.
It's for me like my personal spiritual living room. I would call it like this.
This is your own personal spiritual living room.
When you have a living room in a house, it's like the place where normally everything is coming together, right?
Wine and bread, right? But we can feel it because we know it. And that's the big thing.
There are a few things that make this parish a little bit different. The homilies are shorter, limited to 18 minutes. An effort is made to explain the passages from the Bible more clearly and in a way that is understandable to a younger generation. The young people are challenged as well, and the music is different to what you'd find typically in a Catholic church. Like Eva, David and Valerie are members of the community, and they helped Father George build it.
It really does feel like home for us. We have our literal home, but we also need our spiritual home, and that's really what we found here.
In this home, they want to see more young people entering, which is why they are reaching out to more young people online and expanding in a new building.
God wants us to use us for something really big, and that vision is really to help the church fulfill its potential, to bring Jesus back at the center of everybody's life.
Sarah is half Polish, half Austrian, and has been coming here to the community for 4 years now.
I think that above all, I would say it's a community which is very open for everyone, which is very vivid and very present. The people here, I have the feeling, share this mentality that we try to build a place and space for God to do great things.
It's creating a culture of welcome. One of our mantras is belonging before believing.
And Father George is not the only one trying to revitalize the faith among young people in Austria. In another part of Vienna, a community of Catholics called Loreto has exploded in popularity, offering young Catholics a more modern way to worship. Patrick Knittelfelder is the founder.
We as a movement, we are asking ourselves all the time, what is missing? What's wrong that we cannot bring this gospel to the people? Of course, we need all the traditional parts of a church, but we also need new parts, and we need to transform our message in this time.
At just 1%, the Catholic Church in Vienna has its work cut out for it if it wants to grow back to healthy numbers. But with new parishes and communities like the two you've seen, there seems to be a glimmer of hope.
They create a culture where people are really loved. They can just be who they are. Through us, hopefully, they experience something of the beauty of the love of God, which is inspiring and uplifting and challenging too.
In Vienna, Austria, Colm Flynn, EWTN News in Depth.
If you see or are part of revival efforts in your parish or diocese, tell us about it. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook to share your story with us. After the break, doing ordinary things with extraordinary love. Friends of Mother Teresa share their reflections on her life and work. Plus, another pro-life clinic vandalized. What some lawmakers on Capitol Hill are now proposing to protect pregnancy health care centers.
There's nothing more we can do to keep her comfortable. And just know she's not going to make it. She is going to die.
The words no loved one ever wants to hear from a doctor. But that diagnosis was miraculously changed thanks to the intervention of a modern-day saint. That story ahead.
Whoever, serving the person in the soup kitchen, the dying person in Kaligat, the home for the dying, whoever it was, Queen, President, Prime Minister, the same, she had, this is Jesus for me now. And I'm going to love Jesus in this person. So.
Finding Jesus in everyone you meet. St. Teresa's life was a beautiful example of living out the gospel. The small and humble woman served with her hands, her words, and her heart. But her impact was anything but small. It's still being felt around the world through those who have taken up her mission. EWTN reporter Roselle Regis gives us a glimpse of an upcoming movie about the life and legacy of Mother Teresa, and had the opportunity to speak with several people who knew the 20th century saint.
Saint Teresa of Calcutta, better known as Mother Teresa, passed away 25 years ago, but she leaves behind a legacy of love and compassion.
She was a woman passionately in love with Jesus, and that really explains everything.
To the world, she is one of the greatest spiritual icons of the 20th century, known for her charitable work serving the poor. But to those who were close to her,
she was motherly. She was like my mama.
And now a new film produced by the Knights of Columbus, the world's largest Catholic fraternal organization, seeks to rekindle the faith of young people today and spark a new devotion to Saint Teresa of Calcutta.
Hunger is not only for a piece of bread. Hunger is for love.
Lord, make me a channel of your peace, that where there is hatred, I may bring love.
From caring for the sick and dying in India, to helping the Venezuelan refugees along the border of Brazil, to serving the disabled children in the slums of Nairobi, to feeding the homeless of the South Bronx.
What was really unprecedented about this film was that the Missionaries of Charity opened up completely all of their apostolates and all of their institutional archives to us. And that was really quite extraordinary. If we follow her model, we can become holier people and we can build a better world.
The documentary also features interviews with people who were personally affected by St. Teresa, including Sister Bernice and Father Brian Kolodechuk.
I came from the poorest of the poor. I should be working with the poor. And I survived ghettos, and so if I am, and people, like we give out food to people now the same way that my dad and mom, other people did for us.
Sister Bernice says she will never forget her first encounter with Mother Teresa, because that's when Mother Teresa blessed her with her religious name. She said the second meeting with Mother was even more surreal. Mother Teresa led her and other sisters straight into gunfire in order to start a conversation with the leader of a Chicago gang.
She never looked down on people because of what they did. She knew there was something behind it, and she knew that God can make good out of everything. Like those gangs in Chicago, they became our best friends because we didn't see them as gang people. We see Mother saw Jesus in them, and she taught us to do the same.
Sister Bernice has served the homeless in the Bronx.
Mother Teresa said, "Love until it hurts,"
and is now working with the mentally ill in Canada. She even stopped by to care for the needy during her visit to Washington, D.C.
The Missionaries of Charity here in D.C. is just 1 out of 41 active houses in the United States and 1 out of 750 around the world. In houses like this one, sisters care for the sick and elderly, refugees, orphans, the mentally ill, and other people in need.
Father Brian knew Mother Teresa for more than 20 years, from when he first joined the Missionaries of Charity to when Mother died in 1997 at the age of 87. He shares one of his favorite memories with her, when Mother accompanied his family to the hospital when his sister, who was also a sister of Missionaries of Charity, was diagnosed with cancer.
I remember we went to the doctor and with Mother and my sister, my parents, and Mother said, "I have a gift for you," to the doctor. Make my sister well. So she kind of reversed it, and so it was like he had a chance to be doing something good, and that's how. So that's kind of one. It's just very motherly, you know. She changed all her plans, and she was concerned about my sister.
After Mother Teresa's death, Father Brian, along with help from others, started to compile documents, gather evidence, and conduct interviews to make the case for Mother Teresa to be declared a saint by the Roman Catholic Church. Less than 20 years later, Mother Teresa was declared a saint, canonized by Pope Francis on September 4, 2016. Since then, countless books and documentaries have been made about Mother Teresa. But Father Brian hopes that this new film motivates people to love others, just as Mother Teresa loved.
How can you show love to people right around you? You know, maybe they're a little discouraged, maybe they need a word of encouragement, maybe they need a smile, maybe they need some help. You know, go and just spend some time, visit, especially elderly. So, you know, Mother used to say, do small things with great love, or ordinary things with extraordinary love.
Rochelle Regis, EWTN News in Depth.
Mother Teresa, No Greater Love. The movie will be in theaters on October 3rd and 4th only. You can find out more at motherteresamovie.com. We're following the destruction in the wake of Hurricane Ian. The Week in Review is next.
The more the Vatican stays silent on this or sends confusing messages, the more emboldened the Chinese regime is.
Analysis of the trial of a Catholic cardinal in Hong Kong as the communist regime continues to tighten its grip on religious minorities. Plus, a Catholic church burned and several priests, a religious sister, and others are abducted in Africa. How Pope Francis is responding.
Recovery from one of the strongest storms to ever hit the United States tops the Week in Review. Hurricane Ian slammed into southwest Florida on Wednesday evening near Fort Myers, flooding homes on both of the state's coasts and knocking out the power to nearly 3 million homes and businesses. Ian came ashore as a Category 4 hurricane with winds near 150 miles per hour. It unleashed historic storm surge water levels and catastrophic flooding before heading north towards the Carolinas on Thursday. In the Fort Myers area, homes were ripped from their slabs, businesses swamped with high water, and docks broken like matchsticks. Though millions evacuated coastal areas, many stayed close by.
What is it like to see your community basically underwater? I mean, honestly, I live at the beach, so this was safer than the beach, and I'm a little nervous to go back to my home and see what that looks like.
When the storm passed, rescue workers were out in force to save people trapped in their homes by high waters. Many roads and bridges were impassable, and rescues were only possible by flotilla of boats. A chunk of the Sanibel Causeway fell into the sea, cutting off access to the barrier island where about 6,000 people normally live. Among the most vulnerable, thousands of patients evacuated from nursing homes and hospitals. In Central Florida, residents of an Orlando nursing home were relocated from their flooded facility on ambulances and buses. Authorities fear many senior citizens around the state might be penned into their homes with no way to get out. And this dramatic scene in Naples, Florida. A woman trapped inside her car as waters rose around her. A firefighter waded through rushing water to break a car window to rescue her. She was among the fortunate, as authorities say Hurricane Ian killed at least a dozen people, with that number expected to rise. After leaving Florida, Ian bared down on the Carolinas, where forecasters were predicting a large storm surge. In Charleston, South Carolina, residents prepared sandbags as the governor warned of massive amounts of water likely flooding the city. Though the storm lost strength after slamming into Florida, the effects of flooding and property damage in Georgia and up the coast is expected to be felt for months. Pope Francis is appealing for the release of 9 Catholics, including 5 priests, a religious sister, and a 15-year-old girl who were kidnapped in Cameroon. Catholics increasingly face persecution in the Central African nation torn apart by civil war. The gunman also set fire to the church while carrying out the abduction. This video shows the bishop at St. Mary's walking through what is left of the parish. He did find the sacred host and the ciborium intact, preserved by the tabernacle. The bishop says the pain they feel now they associate with the saving passion of our Lord Jesus Christ. We're following the controversial trial of Cardinal Joseph Zen in Hong Kong. The 90-year-old Bishop Emeritus and 5 others are charged with failing to properly register a fund that provided legal aid to pro-democracy protesters. Mass anti-government protests in the city 3 years ago led to the arrests of hundreds. Cardinal Zen took part in some of those demonstrations. The communist regime alleges Zen and others colluded with foreign forces to endanger China's national security. Zen, who arrived for his trial with the aid of a cane, has been an outspoken critic of communist China, as well as the Vatican's 2018 agreement with the regime that allows China, not the Holy See, to appoint bishops. The court ruled this week that there is sufficient evidence to justify a trial. His next trial date is at the end of October. If Zen is convicted, he will not face jail time, but will have to pay a fine of about $1,200. Father Robert Sirico, the founder of the Acton Institute for the Study of Religion and Liberty, joins us now to provide more insight on Cardinal Zen's arrest and trial. Father Sirico, thank you for being on the show again with us. The regime doesn't seem to want to keep Cardinal Zen in jail. Is this a stunt being used as a deterrent? What's the motive here?
I think they're negotiating position, because remember, what's going on in the background of all of this is the private confidential negotiations about the status of the Catholic Church in China with the Vatican right now. And I think this is a kind of move of a chess piece, if you will, in that whole game.
Where they're saying they're not going to keep him in jail, but at the same time, they're going to put him through a trial. That sounds unnecessary and kind of evil.
Oh, they're flexing their muscles. It's also good to remember there are 7 or 8 bishops in the mainland who are in jail at this present moment as well. And the more the Vatican stays silent on this or sends confusing messages, the more emboldened the Chinese regime is.
In May, Cardinal Zen was arrested at 90 years old and then released on bail. What does the regime hope to gain from the move of the in and out? I know that we've seen pictures of him with his cane and his frailty. Is it possible that he might pass away soon?
I don't think he's, at any threshold of eternity at this point. He's a pretty robust man. I mean, he is 90 years old. But my experiences with him over the last 25 years show him to be very robust. He has traveled a good bit. Remember that he went to Rome, less than a year ago, to try and meet with the Holy Father, who didn't see him. So I don't think they're anticipating there's going to die anytime soon. But it's the ongoing harassment. There are also about 4 or 5 other defendants whose cases are being heard. This is an action that's being taken under this security law. So this wouldn't have happened prior to all of the protests that took place just before COVID, and the attendant arrest, of course, of Jimmy Lai, who's in prison at this moment. Cardinal Zen has been visiting Jimmy Lai, who's a convert to the Catholic Church, a businessman, a Catholic businessman, who Cardinal Zen baptized, and his case is much more severe, actually.
Do we know any news on Jimmy's release or his ongoing detention in jail?
You know, a lot of this is really obscured, as we've just seen in this case with Cardinal Zen, how the trial has been moved and back and forth. We keep hearing that they're about to go to trial again in the next month or so, but that could change at any given moment. We're not dealing with a judiciary in China that has a high regard for the rule of law, where everybody is treated the same before the law and where the law is spelled out very clearly. We're dealing with a very arbitrary and complex communist system.
Father Sirico, your institution, the Acton Institute, released a documentary on Jimmy Lai's life and his very, very strong stance against the regime. Can you tell us if that, talking about it, putting it on the screen, is that an important role that Americans can take to support the church?
We think it's going to be. Right now, what's happening with that film is it's making its way through the various film festivals around the world. Last I heard, it was accepted for a virtual film festival in Hong Kong. We'll see if that actually comes to fruition. But what we're trying to do is build the momentum for concern and awareness around the world as to what this means, not just for Jimmy Lai, not just for Cardinal Zen, not even for Cardinal Zen's defendants, but for the whole of the Chinese people, and including those on the mainland who have to suffer these kind of indignities and arbitrary use of power on the part of the communists.
Father Sirico, you alluded to this, but let's talk about it a little more. The Vatican releasing this short and, for many, disappointing statement about Cardinal Zen's arrest. It has not commented on the trial. Can you give us a little more insight into the reason? What is the back and forth that is happening there?
Well, what's sad about it, the official release from the Secretary of State's office just said that they were following with, intense interest this case. But the Holy Father, on his way back from Kazakhstan, said something a little more ominous. He said, well, Cardinal Zen will say what he wants, as he has in the past, and we know that this has created problems. And that's all that he said, rather than standing with the Cardinal. Even the London Times came out with an editorial saying that the Vatican must speak out, because this is a human rights issue. This isn't just about the Catholic Church in China. Some of the defendants of Cardinal Zen are longtime human rights activists in China, and it's a broad coalition of people. One of the people who is on trial with Cardinal Zen is a singer and lesbian activist in Hong Kong. So you get the very broad perspective of what's going on here in terms of the disregard for human freedom.
And this pro-democracy activity isn't only something that we're seeing in China, in Hong Kong, it's also something that we're seeing in Nicaragua. How would you compare the two situations?
This is a very good point. Nicaragua, Venezuela, Cuba, all of these different places that are having protests against Marxist or quasi-Marxist governments. And in the face of it, again, reticence on the part of the Vatican to speak out forcefully for human rights. I think it's a very delicate and sad moment that the Universal Church, who really believes in human dignity as part of our whole core belief, isn't addressing these concrete circumstances. With China, it's complex because they're in the middle of formal negotiations. But in these other instances, it's even less acceptable.
And what should we then learn as Catholics from these examples?
Well, we learn our own history, don't we? It was said in the first century that the blood of the martyrs is the seed of Christians, that one of the reasons that Christianity became so prolific in the first and second centuries that took down the entire Roman Empire was because the believers were willing to lay down their lives for the sake of the truth. So one of the first things we learn is that this is part of who we are. I think in the West, we have other forms of persecution, of alienation from the mainstream of society, though more subtle, are nonetheless equally as virulent. And one hopes that this fortifies our strength and purifies the church so that people who are professed believers understand that that comes with a cost. As Bonhoeffer said under the Nazi regime, this is the cost of discipleship.
The cost of discipleship, indeed. Thank you so much, Father Sirico, for this great example.
Thank you.
Another pro-life medical center has been vandalized, this time at a Denver area Catholic clinic. Police quickly arrested a suspect who sprayed graffiti messages on the walls and front doors. Investigators did not say if the clinic was targeted for its pro-life mission. This is just the latest in a series of attacks on pregnancy centers in the wake of the Supreme Court overturning of Roe v. Wade. Lawmakers on Capitol Hill have introduced a bill aimed at protecting pro-life clinics. So far, the bill has 28 co-sponsors and the support of the March for Life.
She made her way back to the friary and said who she was, the Italian woman, with a sick, dying daughter. And we were called here. Padre Pio literally called me here.
Called to receive healing, the miracle that carved the path to devotion to Padre Pio. When we return.
We recently celebrated the feast day of Saint Padre Pio. He was an Italian priest blessed with stigmata, the wounds of Christ. There are many stories of his saintly intervention around the world. Reporter Mark Irons explains one miraculous event attributed to Saint Padre Pio that inspired a national shrine in his honor in the United States.
He was a simple priest in southern Italy, known for having supernatural gifts, including the stigmata, the same wounds Jesus received at his crucifixion. Catholics and even non-religious around the world now know him as Saint Padre Pio, a famous Franciscan friar of the 20th century, and this man knew him personally.
Humility, one word.
Padre Pio didn't care for all the attention, fellow Italian friar Father John Aurelia told me. As a teenager studying for the priesthood, Aurelia first met the stigmatic priest in San Giovanni Rotondo, the town where Padre Pio lived with other Franciscans. He heard of Padre Pio bearing the painful nail wounds of Christ, but he wanted to find out if the wounds were real himself, so he squeezed the friar's hand.
We went to San Giovanni Rotondo, and I took Padre Pio's hand, and I did like this. And he said, "Ow! Ouch! It hurts."
Besides the stigmata, Padre Pio was known to have mystical gifts, including the ability to read people's hearts and even heal the sick. Huge crowds would gather at his friary in San Giovanni Rotondo. People waited in long lines to see him celebrate Mass or have their confessions heard. The priest would sometimes spend more than half the day in the confessional, available to those seeking forgiveness for sins. In the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, word continued to spread of the Italian friar, but at the time, he wasn't well known to all Catholics in the U.S. That might leave you wondering why today, in the tiny town of Bardo, Pennsylvania, the National Center for Padre Pio stands out in the surrounding empty green farmland.
One of the main centers of devotion to Padre Pio in the U.S. can be found right here in the Pennsylvania countryside. And the story behind how this place was created is a miracle.
In 1968, not far from here at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, Vera and Harry Calandra received the awful news. Their 2-year-old daughter, Vera Marie, suffering through an ongoing battle with congenital urinary tract problems, was not going to survive.
And just know she's not going to make it. She is going to die.
Those were the words of renowned surgeon C. Everett Koop, who would later become the U.S. Surgeon General under Ronald Reagan. He said he had tried everything, but had run out of options for his patient. In the summer of 1968, he removed Vera Marie's bladder to provide some temporary comfort before her death. Dr. Koop told the Calandras to make arrangements for their daughter's funeral. But Vera Marie still lives today.
He said, you need to come to terms with this now. You can't hang on to this dying child. And my mother went home and she didn't accept it.
Vera Calandra, a devout Catholic, picked up a book someone had given to her about a then 81-year-old priest from Italy, Padre Pio. As she read, she heard
the inner words as she described a locution and inner voice of, come quickly to Italy, bring your little girl to me, and do not delay.
Vera Calandra acted quickly. She made arrangements to travel, and within weeks she was in Italy with her daughter. Waiting in a packed corridor with others, her sick 2-year-old daughter, Vera Marie, by her side, Miss Calandra saw Padre Pio approach.
And their eyes locked. And that's when she made her promise. Make a miracle so that all will believe. He took his wounded hand, covered in his half glove, and he pushed it up in front of her face. And she was able to kiss his hand, and he touched all of us individually on the heads and blessed us. And the next day we were on our way home from Italy.
Dr. C. Everett Koop had surgically removed Vera Marie's bladder before the trip to Italy. But after they returned home, a follow-up x-ray revealed something unexplained.
They found a bladder from where he had removed it. He could not explain that himself, and he just said there's a rudimentary, were the words that he used, bladder. And we don't know whatever you're doing, keep doing it.
54 years later, a healthy Vera Marie recounts the story of her healing, just as her mother would share it with her and all who would listen. Padre Pio passed away soon after Vera Calandra took her daughter to Italy in 1968, and she would dedicate the rest of her life in thanksgiving to the friar and ultimately build this center near the family's home in Pennsylvania to help promote his name. She passed away in 2004. A reporter once asked Padre Pio what else he could hope for after achieving widespread spiritual fame. Father John Aurelia recounts what Padre Pio told the reporter.
I want to be a poor friar who prays. Simple as that. That's Padre Pio's spirituality.
At the National Center for Padre Pio in Bartow, Pennsylvania, pilgrims can learn more about the saint's life, see real items he used, including his confession booth, and visit an exact replica of his chapel. But the focus is leading souls to Christ.
People who would come to see Padre Pio and they would, almost throw themselves on, Padre Pio, I love you, I love you. And one of his more famous quotes was, no, you do not love Padre Pio because of Padre Pio. You love Padre Pio because I leave you to Jesus.
Nick Gibboni, the executive director of the center, works with the Calandra family today to further the mission that Padre Pio had all along, as a humble, prayerful friar.
To Padre Pio, it was all about leading souls to Christ through the Catholic Church.
Mark Irons, EWTN News In Depth.
That does it for us on EWTN News In Depth this week. I'm Montse Alvarado. Be sure to tune in next week at this time for our coverage on some of the responses in Europe and in the U.S. to the first phase of the Synod on Synodality. See you then.